Hello there. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a pair of really fabulously fascinating sequels, and we're going to get to really hear them. This is going to be a great little talk. I'm telling you from a musical point of view, because we're going to get to listen to a lot of stuff. The sequel that we're talking about, the origin work that the sequels come from, is Gluck's Dance of the Furies, one of the most amazing pieces of music in the second half of the 18th century, and one that had remarkable consequences for virtually all future music for a number of reasons. Now, the original Dance of the Furies was not the Dance of the Furies. Let's start at the beginning. As you know, Gluck was the great operatic reformer, the guy who said that serious opera should not contain da capo arias where singers come out and embellish and go crazy and do nothing, and it should be simple and accompanied throughout by the orchestra. And I mean simple, the melody should be simple and clean and not frilly. And he did this in his opera Orfeo and Euridice, Orfeo, from about 1761. What most people don't realize is that around the same time, 1761, 1762, he did something just as radical with ballet. He wrote a ballet that's about half an hour long called Don Juan. Now, we all know the story of Don Juan, and we all know what happens to Don Juan, or Don Giovanni, as he became in Mozart's hands. He gets sucked down to hell at the end of the opera, or the ballet. In this case, it's a ballet. And in that ballet, the dance where Don Juan gets sucked down to hell became the Dance of the Furies about 10 years later in 1773, when he needed a dance for the French version of his opera Orfeo, because as you know, when you do an opera in France, you just gotta have a ballet. This was true even 100 years later, as Wagner found out to his distress with his opera Tannhäuser, which caused a riot on account of where the ballet was. So let's start with Don Juan, because our story of sequels has two phases. First, the Don Juan phase, and second, the Orfeo phase. So the Don Juan phase, at the time that Gluck was working on these pieces in Vienna in the 1760s, one of the composers, who was then a cellist in the orchestra in the theaters in Vienna, was Boccherini. He was there with his dad. They were cellists in the theater. Boccherini knew Gluck's music quite well. And in 1770, he was appointed court composer to the Infanta, the Prince Luis of Spain, who was the brother of King Carlos III. And he started writing symphonies. And one of these symphonies is his most famous. That's Opus 12, number 4, in D minor. And Opus 12, number 4, became known as La Casa del Diavolo, the House of the Devil, because in the finale of that symphony, he transplanted the entire final descent into hell from Gluck's ballet, Don Juan. But let's talk about the music itself. Why was this such a big deal? Well, the thing that's so fascinating about the ballet that Gluck wrote is that the ending is the first example, really the first example, of horror movie music. It really is. I mean, it's really creepy. It's spooky, creepy music. There's the scene in the cemetery, and then hell opens up, and Don Juan gets sucked down to this furious maelstrom of music, and nothing like that had ever been written before. There is no precedent for what Gluck did. And I'm going to play you a little bit of what be the version from the Orpheus ballet, because that's the one I happen to have handy here. I also have the Gluck ballets, but I have the Gluck original Don Juan ballet, but I don't have permission to use that music. So I'm going to stick with my good old friends at Naxos, where I can get the Dance of the Furies from the later Paris version. It's the same music, slightly differently scored. But in any case, let's just listen to the opening, and you'll see what I mean by it being horror movie music. It is spooky, creepy, and vicious, and violent, and really quite startling for 1761. It does not sound like your late Baroque frou-frou stuff or even gallant stuff. This is serious music. Listen here. Okay, what do you think of that? It's really something, isn't it? I mean, you may have heard it before. It became very famous, very popular. It's a separate number. Sometimes we hear it. And actually, in the ballet, the scene before that runs into it is in the cemetery. It's the cemetery scene. It's very, very spooky. I mean, very soft and creepy, and it runs in directly into that final dance. So if you get to hear the ballet, you'll hear even more of that sort of doom-laden, wonderfully atmospheric, programmatic movie music. I mean, it's film music. It's wonderful, wonderful film music, and wonderfully choreographic as well. So that is the piece that Boccherini took. And there are two elements that I want you to pay attention to when you hear it. There is the bass line, which it's really a chaconne, that dance, that bum 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 bum, that. And then there's what I call the boogeyman chord. That's like if someone jumps out from behind the corner and goes boo. It's a dissonant chord that just goes da 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 wah, like that. And I'm going to play it for you again, and I'm going to point out with a little arrow there when it happens. The boogeyman chord under with the music playing underneath, so you'll hear it again. Listen to it one more time, because you really do have to get it into your head to enjoy the music I'm going to play next. Okay, you got it, right? You got the boogeyman chord, and you got the bass line, the dum bum 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 bum, that thing. Those are the two elements that you really need to keep in mind. Now, when Boccherini came to write his symphonies, Opus 12, there's 6 of them, in 1771 for the court of Spain, I mean, he chose this Don Juan subject. Of course, as you know, it's a Spanish story, first of all, so there was the implied tribute to his patron, and Gluck by then was extremely famous. He hadn't yet composed the Paris version of Orfeo, but Boccherini knew that music. They might not have known it in Spain. We don't know. But he took it as a musical depiction of Don Juan's descent into hell, and he put it in the symphony, now as the finale. Now, in doing that, the symphony has 3 movements, but it's a fascinating symphony for a number of reasons. First of all, it's in cyclical form, which is amazing for the period. The first movement and the last movement both have exactly the same introductions. They lead to different music, which is really a wonderful little trick, because you don't know what's going to happen when this introduction returns. It seems like a recapitulation of the first movement, but instead it veers off and we hear the Dance of the Furies. And Boccherini has recomposed it. He's made it in some ways even more vicious, by compressing the order of events and making the accompanying music more turbulent. But he's also expanded it with a lot of material of his own to make a complete 5 or 6 minute long symphonic movement. And so now what we're going to do is hear a bit of Boccherini's finale, just the opening where you will hear, that wonderful bass line and the boogeyman chords in Boccherini's version, which is quite a bit different in terms of sonority than Gluck's. But here it is. Marvelous, isn't it? I mean, it's a genuine lift, but if you hear the whole movement, I don't have the space here to be able to show you how, cleverly Boccherini recomposes and adjusts these thematic objects that he found in Gluck. But it became a very popular symphony, and it's still Boccherini's most popular symphony, to the extent any of Boccherini's symphonies are popular. And that was, by the way, the Deutsche Kammer Akademie Neuss, conducted by Johannes Goritzky on CPO, who deserves our thanks for also allowing me to use the material so that I can present it to you here. So now we're at 1771 in our journey of sequels to the Dance of the Furies. And now the final dance from Don Juan became the Dance of the Furies in the 1773 version of Orfeo, this thing right here, that we got from Naxos. And sticking with Naxos, we come to Haydn. In 1781 or 82, somewhere in there, 82, 83, 10 years after the Dance of the Furies, Haydn is writing a symphony. Symphony number 80 in D minor. D minor is the demonic key. It's the key of Don Giovanni also. And Mozart, when he wrote Don Giovanni, also took his cue from Gluck, particularly the cemetery music, from Gluck's Don Juan, Don Giovanni. And that could be a whole nother talk. It's really, really amazing how this music seeped into the consciousness, of the classical period. So Haydn is working on Symphony number 80, right? And it's going to be in D minor. And it's going to sound kind of Gluckian, but in a totally, totally different way. Because what Haydn is going to do is make fun of it. Haydn is going to make music funny. And he decided to make music funny by starting with Gluck's Dance of the Furies. Actually, he was making it funny before that, but one of the ways. This is one of the ways. Now, Haydn knew Gluck. They knew each other quite well. All these people knew each other. They were all living in Vienna, hanging out. Boccherini knew Gluck, or he knew Gluck's music. Haydn lived in Gluck's house when he was a kid, when he just had gotten kicked out of St. Stephen's and had to make a living for himself in the late 1740s and early 1750s. And he wound up living with Porpora, who was a Italian opera seria composer whose apprentice he became. And Gluck lived in the same house, and they knew each other. They knew each other quite well. When Haydn wrote his Opus 20 quartets, he trotted over to Gluck's house to play his F minor quartet to see what Gluck thought of it. And Gluck apparently liked it very much. They respected each other. They got along. Another one of those, wouldn't you like to have been a fly on the wall at Gluck's house when Haydn came over to play his F minor quartet, Opus 20? It's just so cool, the idea that these people were all hanging around together. So Haydn wrote his Symphony number 80 in D minor, and he based the first movement on Gluck's Dance of the Furies. But oh my, what happens to it is oh so different and hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. And I'm going to play you the entire movement without the exposition repeat. We're going to hear the exposition, the development, and the recapitulation all kind of separately, just so you get a sense of it. Now, I want you to hear the exposition of Symphony Number 80 in D minor, the first movement. And this is with the Cologne Chamber Orchestra conducted by Helmut Müller-Brühl on Naxos. It's a very, very fine performance, but some wacky things happen along the way. And you will hear the boogeyman chord. You'll hear the opening bass line. It's a different bass line, but the concept is very similar, as you will be able to tell. And it's just great. So here you go. Listen to the exposition, the first movement of Haydn's Symphony Number 80. Now, what was that tune that closed the exposition? That hilarious little tune. It's barrel organ music, right? It's just the silliest little nothing tune. And there's something very quirky about that tune. It doesn't have the right number of measures. It's actually a 7-bar theme, which is like practically unheard of. It's missing a bar. It ends too soon. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to whistle it, and you just put up with me and count the measures. It's in 3/4. So it's I mean, it should go da-da-dum, bum, bum, bum. I mean, just to round it off. It's too short. It's frivolous. It's calliope music. It doesn't belong there at all. It's completely disconcerting. And that's the point, of course, because you have this ferocious opening, and then it tries to cheer up, and then the boogeyman chord upsets the music, and it's all full of fury and anxiety and energy, and it's not going to go anywhere. And then you have this little tune. Now, what happens in the development section? This is what's so incredible. The development section is the longest part of the whole movement. And it is a battle, an all-out battle between this silly little tune and the Dance of the Furies, the opening. And Haydn does it in the most wonderful, wonderful way, because the Dance of the Furies is very developmental. I mean, it's trying to achieve something, to go somewhere. And this little tune never changes. It never changes. There's only one part where it kind of gets a little lost, you'll hear. But basically, it stays the same. And I've got to start right at the end of the exposition where that tune comes in, because you have to hear Haydn's use of silence. Haydn was the first composer to really understand how to use silence, especially to make music funny, because what happens in this movement with just in the pauses is a lesson in itself in comic timing. It really is. So now let's listen. We're going to hear the end of the exposition and then the entire development section, which is a good solid 2 minutes of music. It's very, very long. Here it is. that just incredible? Isn't it hysterically funny? I mean, that doopy little tune with everything that this thing does, that doopy little tune keeps coming back, always unchanged, always just insolent. That's what it is. It's insolent. It's a joker. It's the joker in the deck. And so then the development section, finally, that tune, the Dance of the Furies business, finally just runs out of gas. It gives up. It gives up completely. And the recapitulation sails in, but in D major. And the symphony's going to stay basically in D major for the rest of its life, except for the minuet. But the bottom line is the recapitulation is very short. It's less than a minute, and it completely leaves out that opening because it's the Dance of the Fury business has been running through the whole development, and it's failed. It's failed miserably. So now let's hear the end of the development and the entire recapitulation leading to the end of the movement. And of course, our friend, that barrel organ, that hurdy-gurdy music, ends the movement with complete insouciance. It's never changed at all. It's still there. It's jolly little ridiculous self. And that's how that movement ends. And this kind of music got Haydn into a lot of trouble in North Germany, particularly where they took music very, very seriously. Haydn was looked at as a clown, as a joker, as somebody who was not serious. And, well, he was a clown, he was a joker, but he was very serious about his humor. And this is one of those miraculous symphonies. Nobody plays it. Nobody knows it. I did see it performed live once. Rostropovich did it, of all people, with the National Symphony at Carnegie Hall, and it was a smash. It went over fabulously. Why don't people play these pieces? I also want to play you just the opening of the finale, which has one of Haydn's most syncopated ideas. The basic idea for the entire finale is just syncopated rhythm. That instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, it's 1, 1, That's, the sort of syncopated rhythm that runs through it. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. Here's the opening theme of the finale. So there you see two major consequences of Gluck's Dance of the Furies. One by Boccherini, a marvelous, marvelous symphony, and the other by Haydn, using the material in a way that revolutionized the language of music and revolutionized it in a way that a lot of people didn't approve of and that most people still don't understand, because humor is the most incomprehensible quality in a musical context, particularly in classical music, which of course is serious and sublime and you know, a cultural monument and you know, tell Haydn that, right? That's why Haydn has never gotten the acclaim or the popularity that he really deserves. You know, because people still don't quite get his sense of humor, and you never really know whether he's being serious or not. And this wacky symphony, number 80 in D minor, is the one that really sticks it to him. And it's based on one of the scariest and most ferocious pieces of music that was composed in the entire second half of the 18th century. In fact, in all of music, really. I mean, there was nothing like it before Gluck, and there was nothing like it after Haydn got his hands on it. So that is the sequel, two sequels to this wonderful, wonderful story, I think, of musical patrimony and the way that that was understood and interpreted by two geniuses who came a little bit later. Thank you for listening, folks. Keep on listening, and take care.